Hi everybody, this is Brennan from Common Motor, common-motor.com on the internet, and today we're going to be diagnosing the headlight and running light, as in the turn signal running lights, on this 1975 Honda CB360. Now in 74, the US government had mandates for safety illumination on bikes, and this 360 is an example of that, where the running lights were on if the bike was on, and we have what I call the split headlight circuit, where we have a headlight on-off control on one handlebar switch and a headlight high beam control on the opposite switch. There are some later bikes that do not even have an on-off control, meaning if the key is on, the headlight's on, and we have a fuse box, in this case it's under the seat, with multiple fuses in it because the circuit splits and goes all kinds of different directions as compared to some of the earlier bikes. So the bikes that tend to have this type of wiring setup are bikes that are usually built from 1974 forward. We're looking at CB360s, CL360s, CJ360s, the 550s, the K3, K4, the Fs, and the ones that were built in the mid-70s, as well as the different 750s, and even some of the small four cylinders like the 350Fs and 400Fs. We've gone ahead and taken the gas tank and the seat off this 360 and opened up the headlight bucket because we're going to be pointing to a bunch of parts here on this bike. This happens to be a 1975 360, so it has all the bits and pieces of the headlight, gauge, running light, taillight circuits here. Now, we typically will start off with saying, we know electrons flow from ground to 12 volt positive, right? And if you haven't seen our video on ground circuits and also on the 12 volt positive circuit, make sure you check those out first before you dive into this. However, in this example on the bike, I'm going to run through the circuit backwards from how the current flows. I'm going to start with the 12 volt positive side of the circuit, and then we're going to end up back at ground. We know that our 12 volt positive circuits from the key switch are always solid black wire. So we're going to start with a solid black wire that is running into the left-hand handlebar switch right here. And there's actually sometimes a couple wires running into it, but there's usually at least one solid black wire that runs into the switch. Now this bike happens to have the on-off headlight switch on this control. Some later bikes, like starting about 75, 76, there is no on-off control, and when the key switch is turned on, the headlight is always on. So the Honda bypassed the switch altogether, and out of that switch, or even out of that bypass, that solid black wire connects to two other wires, and it splits. One wire is a black and red wire, which goes to the headlight half of the circuit. The other wire is a brown and blue wire, which controls the tail light side of the circuit, as well as the gauge light parts of the circuit as well. So those two wires, it splits, but they both run down the spine to this multi-fuse fuse box here. Now this happens to be where it is on a 360. On some of the four-cylinder bikes, you'll find it on the left-hand side under the side cover here. But this is how you know you have a bike with these split circuits. It's because you have a 3-fuse fuse box as opposed to a single fuse box you would see on the earlier bikes. We are only looking at what's called the head fuse, which is going to be the headlight fuse, and the taillight fuse. So they split here, they go into the fuse box. The black and red wire goes through a 7 amp fuse, not a 15 amp fuse, and then out to a black and yellow wire. The brown and blue wire goes through a different 7 amp fuse and becomes a brown and white wire. Now, let's talk about that. That brown and white wire then controls the tail light circuit, the running light, not the brake light, and the gauge light's illumination. We're not going to go into detail in that on this video. We do have another video that covers the running lights for the tail light and the gauge lights on a brown-white circuit. So, out of the fuse box on that black and yellow wire, and then all the way back up the harness to the left-hand switch. So we're making this like big loop on the bike here. It's a little ridiculous. So our black and yellow wire makes its way into the left-hand handlebar switch, and it is connected to our low beam, high beam control here for the headlight. If we're in the low beam position, our wire comes out of there and turns to a white wire and goes to the headlight bulb, out of the headlight bulb, to our ground circuit, which is where, again, our current would originate from, our ground circuits being a dark green wire. Now, if we're in the high beam mode, it changes to a dark blue wire. It has the same routing through the headlight bulb itself, but it's on the high beam filament and back to ground. But there's also a little bit split coming off that same blue wire before it makes its way to the headlight bulb to illuminate the gauge high beam indicator bulb as well. Another thing that's happening in this left-hand switch that's not obvious and can be configured in multiple different ways that Honda did over the years is the front turn signal running lights. I know that sounds confusing, but basically, in 1974 moving forward, DOT standards mandated that the two front turn signals were also illuminated if the bike was running. Now we'll get into the tracing of that circuit a little bit later on in the video, but I want to mention that that's also some stuff that's happening here in this switch box. The very first part we're going to test is going to be the actual headlight. In this case, this happens to be one of our aftermarket LED headlights, but it doesn't matter. All headlights test the same way. Whether you have a halogen bulb or incandescent bulb, it's going to be the same thing. We have here our green wire, which is ground, our white wire, which is our low beam, and our blue wire, which is high beam. And we're just going to do this directly to the battery. I'll test the low beam first. Connect my jumper here to the positive terminal, the battery, just like that. And I'm going to touch my negative terminal to the negative side of the battery, and light kicks on. Great. Same thing, we're going to go to the positive side of the blue wire here. Jumper, we shouldn't have to touch anything, and so disconnect that from the battery. Our headlight is good. We're going to be testing the function of the on-off headlight switch right here, and the bundle of wires for the switch plug into the harness underneath the tank here in this kind of big cluster. A lot of the earlier bikes, you get the bird's nest inside the bucket. On this 360, it happens to be this kind of bundle under the tank. Got my test light hooked up to the negative side of the battery, and I always like to test my test light, make sure it's good and the battery's good. So everything's great there. Go ahead and turn on my key. All right, if key switch is on, I'm going to test the black wires here, and I should get the test light to kick on. That means, obviously, we have power from, or 12-volt positive from this point all the way back to the positive terminal of the battery. So we're going to go from the rest of this onward. So, like I said earlier, the black wires go into the key switch, or into this handlebar switch here, and split into the black red and brown red wires. So let's test the black red first. In fact, I can just go ahead and unplug those two. Let's do that. Plug that one. Unplug that one. So there's our black red and brown blue. Let's go black red. It's off. Let's turn the switch on. Test light kicks on. So that says that connection works. Test this one as well. Test light's on. And if I turn the switch off, test light's off. So that's how I go about testing the switch. So I'm going to go ahead and reconnect these, and I'll make my way back to the fuse box. Here's our fuse box on the 360, right here on the back fender. And we have, as the diagram says, 3 fuses here. Our main power fuse is this one here with the red wires, but we're not worried about that. We're worried about what's called the headlight fuse, or the head fuse, which is this middle one here. It's a 7 amp fuse. And the taillight one, which is this one right here. So we tested the switch. We got the red wire, or black wire with the red stripe, and brown wire with the blue stripe. Those make their way from the switch all the way back here to this fuse box. We're gonna test these. Now I have my key switch on. I'm gonna go ahead and turn on my headlight switch. It's on because we knew that was good. And I'm gonna test with the test light here. So test light kicks on. That means I got a good connection from here all the way back to the positive side of the battery on that one. I'm gonna go ahead and test the other one here. This is the black-red. Test light kicks on. Perfect. All right, while I'm here, I'm gonna test the other side of each fuse, because sometimes fuses look like they're good and they're actually bad, and sometimes these little holders here get full of corrosion and such. So we're good here. All right, on that side, this is our fuse is good. And that there. Great. As we mentioned, here's our brown white wire that's going to end up going to our tail light and gauge light assembly. We're not going to diagnose anything from here forward on this video. Again, we have another video that talks about it. We're going to focus primarily on this part of the circuit that comes out of this fuse, which is the black and yellow wire. It's super hard to see, but I can see a stripe on it right here. And that wire is going to make its way up to the left-hand switch box. So we'll go over the left-hand switch box and see if that's working over there. We've gone from the fuse box back up the harness to again, this cluster here that's under the tank, and I have identified my black wire with a yellow stripe on it, which is gonna tie into this handlebar switch through some of these wires here. But let me make sure I'm getting 12 volt positive to this wire. Again, my key is on, my headlights on switch just switched on, and let's see if this is getting power. Sure enough, power all the way there, 12 volt positive all the way there. And when I turn off the headlight switch, it turns off, so we're good. Let's get this plugged back in, and then we'll actually get into the bucket and make sure the switch is doing what it's supposed to do. Back at the headlight bucket, and what we have here are the two wires that control the high beam, low beam control out of the left-hand switch. So that yellow black wire goes into the switch. And out of it becomes the white wire, solid white wire for the low beam, and the dark blue wire for the high beam. And we'll see we're getting power all the way through there. Make sure we light up. Got my test light. I'm gonna go ahead and connect to ground. We know that's ground. And I'm gonna turn on the key switch. Key switch is on. See, some of our running lights came on. My headlight switch is on. My high beam, low beam switch is in the low beam position. That means the white wire should turn on when I touch up the test light. Sure enough, it does. And if I flip the switch, it should turn off. Let me just get really in there so you guys can see it. All right, there, working. Go to high beam, it turns off, which means the blue wire should now be on. Test light's on, so it is. If these are all working, that means the circuit is functioning properly, and therefore the headlight should also be functioning properly when connected here. So that's the completeness of the headlight circuit on the multi-fuse split switch design bikes, or some of the bikes I said are missing the on-off switch on the right-hand control that are just wired directly to be on when the key switch is on. The last thing we're going to look at in this part of the electrical system are what we call the running lights, which means on the turn signals here, if the bike is on, or the key is on, I should say, the lights are illuminated for safety. That was something that happened during all the DOT compliance stuff starting in 1974, and we've seen it moving forward on lots of bikes, you know, up until today. So if the bike is on, these lights are on for safety purposes. So let's talk about the wiring layout for these running lights up front there. Again, people get really confused because they're turn signals. And what makes them confusing is that inside of these lenses here is a double filament bulb, a dual filament bulb, much like the tail light. So one filament's on one circuit, the other filament's on the other for the turn signals. But we're only looking at the running light side of the two. So as far as the circuit layout goes, we start with ground, and our ground is through the body of the stem and the lenses like this, just like we've had in our single filament lenses, through the dimmer of the two filaments of the bulb, out of the bulb, into the bucket. One side is going to be a light blue wire with a white stripe. The opposite side will be a light orange wire with a white stripe. The white stripe is the thing that's important, because the regular turn signals are orange and light blue, but the running lights are blue, or I should say light blue, and the running lights are blue with the white stripe and orange with the white stripe. So it's about the stripes that indicate they're for the running light circuits. Now, those running lights, orange and blue wires, run back into this left-hand switch box where they connect to 12-volt positive power. To add even more potential confusion to this circuit for the running lights, addressing the left-hand switch has to do with inconsistency from Honda. Now, those lights get power if the key's on. They're supposed to power up and be illuminated if the key is in the run position. Now, were they tied into the 12-volt positive circuit? Well, that changed over the years. Now, there's definitely something in the switch here that provides that 12-volt positive tie-in, but based on your model or your switch configuration, that's different. So they're not consistent throughout production in the late 70s Hondas. Honda sometimes would use a jumper from one circuit to another to bridge the 12-volt positive gap. Sometimes it has to do with how things were actually attached to the switches, how things were soldered together. So there's not one way that it was done. We've seen lots of different examples of it, and there's too many of them to try to explain the variance. So just know that if you're not getting 12-volt positive power, 12-volt positive connection to the running lights, it has to do with something going on in the switch box here and how they tie into the 12-volt positive side of the circuit. Now, at this point, you might be saying to yourself, all right, well, you can't tell me how to trace those. What do I do? And we kind of have like three options to think about on dealing with the running lights. The first option is going to be, well, you crack open the switch and try to figure out how was this particular switch tying to 12-volt positive power. Maybe it's a dirty terminal, maybe it had to do with how some solder was connected, and you figure out how the factory set it up on your particular bike or your sub-variation or even the switch manufacturer, and you fix it there. The second option would be to unplug the light blue white stripe wire and orange and white stripe wire from the harness and tap them directly into a solid black 12-volt positive wire that you find inside your headlight bucket. You might have to make a splitter because there may not be enough terminals in there to plug into a splitter. And what that will do is, if the key switch is on and you're getting 12-volt positive power through the black wires, therefore the lights will light up. If the key switch is on, key switch is off, lights turn off. Our third option is to just go ahead and disable the running lights. So that would mean you unplug the orange white stripe wire and the light blue white stripe wire from the signals to the harness. So just unplug them, you've disabled them, they're fine. Now, it doesn't mean you've disabled the actual turn signals, because they're on a different circuit that is controlled on the different part of the switch, and they have their own filament with the bulb. So they'll still work, assuming that your circuit works there. And so make sure you check out our video on turn signal, switch, and circuit diagnostic. We're going to trace this circuit starting from the negative side through the positive side of the circuit. Like I said, the stem and this housing body it should be ground. So I'm going to go ahead and connect my test light to that. And I'm going to turn on the key. I'm going to get to it. Key's on. And I know that all my solid black wires, 12 volt positive, have power. So I'm going to just tap into a 12 volt positive here. That's in the bucket. And test light kicks on. So that means I have good ground connection here to the stem. All right. I've disconnected the running light wire from the headlight bucket here, and I do have the light blue and white tube on this one to indicate it, and I have a light blue. There it is here. That's the light blue with white connection up here inside the bucket. So that's how you know. You can see how it has the white on it, and that side is clear. So let's test that we're getting power through here. What I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to go ahead and just tap this into a 12 volt positive, which I know we have a solid black up here somewhere. Oh, where is it? Solid black, where are you? Here you are, right there. Let's just tap that into there. Just make sure it's making contact. Should be fine. I'm like to take my test light. I'm connected to ground. I'm gonna turn my key on. Key is on, and inside the housing here where the bulb sits, there's two little dots. Now one of them is going to be getting power connected to 12 volt positive. The other one will be turned off because it's turn signal. So let's find out which one is which. All right, that one's off. Nothing's coming there. That one's on. Okay, so that means I have a good connection from right now through ground to the test light to that contact inside the socket back to 12 volt positive there. So take that out, test light turns off. So that says the actual turn signal element is good, and the other thing to diagnose would be the bulb. Last thing to diagnose is my bulb, just to make sure my bulb is good, and we do have two filaments inside the bulb here, so we're going to go ahead and just test them both because it's easy enough to do. Our round body of the bulb is ground, so I'm going to grab it there with that, so we can connect this to anything that's ground, so we knew that was ground. That should be fine. I'm going to take my jumper here, I'm going to go to 12 volt positive, which I know is a solid black wire here. So get in there like that. Make sure I didn't touch anything. Turn on my key, which is on, and I'm just going to test. I'm going to touch little contacts here really carefully. That one works, and that one works. That one's a lot dimmer. That would have been the running light, and that would be the actual turn signal, which is the bright one. So, bulb is good. All right, we got the bike reassembled, all the parts put back on. Let's test our circuit out to make sure it's working like it's supposed to. Key is on. Okay, our running lights are on with our keys on. Let's go ahead and turn on the headlight. I have it on the low beam position. Headlights on. My gauge lights are on. My tail light's on. And we go high beam. High beam. Cool. Everything it seems to be working. This concludes the electrical troubleshooting on what I call the split circuit, high beam, low beam, posts, DOT bikes, stuff that's about 1974 Ford that has this more complicated fusebox circuit and split headlight circuit. Yeah. So anyway, I hope this was helpful for you guys in diagnosing. I said there are a lot of variants that Honda did, especially with those running lights through the years, so make sure you pay attention to that. Otherwise, thanks for watching. As always, this is Brendan with Common Motor, common-motor.com on the internet. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Subscribe to our newsletter via our website, and of course, down below, subscribe to this YouTube channel. Don't forget to ring the bell for notifications, and we'll see you next time.